Hello, my name is Professor Shiladitya Rakshit. Introduction. The unique situation in India seems to have factored in both the presence and the necessity of child labour, notwithstanding the evils and huge harms associated with this problem. Child labour seems to remain rampant and even on the rise at various locations in India. This seems to be a combination of the socio-economic situation in the country as it stands today and has been the case over the last century, the chronic population problem as well as a combination of political and cultural factors. A majority of the problem has its underpinnings in a need-based economic context, and we'll see how the law has taken this into consideration in its applications. Learning outcomes. To give students an overview of the current situation with respect to child labour in India, a brief understanding of the causes and effects of the problem, an analysis of the legal framework in place, and the attempts on part of the state to resolve and combat the issue. By the end of the module, students will have a greater understanding of the chronic nature of the problem and the mechanisms through which the issue has both been addressed and has subsisted despite these efforts. Definitions. In its essence, the definition of child labour would be work that takes children away from normal activity, like attending regular schools, and involves them in activity that could be mentally, physically, or socially harmful to their growth and development. It deprives them of their childhood and innocence. UNICEF has taken a variant view in defining child labour. It has divided the issues into exploitative and destructive work on one end and beneficial work that enhances the development of the child on the other end of the spectrum. Not all work clearly falls in either category. However, a child of age between 5 to 11 years should have undertaken 1 hour of economic activity or 28 hours of domestic activity in 1 week. For a child between 12 to 14 years of age, the hours stipulated are 14 hours of economic activity, or at least 42 hours of economic activity and domestic work per week. The Indian Census Office defines child labour in 2001 as an activity undertaken by a child between 17 years that is economically productive. It should be with or without remuneration. It could be either physical or mental. It covers participation in farm activity and milk production on a part-time or full-time basis. These are split into 2 groups: main workers who work for 6 months or more, and marginal child workers who work sporadically but less than 6 months in the year. Causes of child labour: poverty and overpopulation interwoven with illiteracy, lack of schools infrastructure, and the growth of an informal economy all come together to ensure that children go to work instead of schools and engage in other developmental activities. Children bring in money that is desperately needed to supplement inadequate funds. The parents are caught in a web of large families and no means of providing for them as they do not have adequate employment opportunities. They are not particularly worried about the child's future as the impeding hunger at home needs to be quelled. Lack of awareness of the need to invest in education for the children and thus their future compounded with lack of infrastructure and institutions make child laborers a reality. The prevalence of an informal economy which has insubstantial implementation of law and order and usually being associated with low pay makes it easy for child laborers to flourish in the small towns and villages of India. Often children engaged in home-based activities and manufacturing after attending schools to supplement the income at home. Framework to deal with the issue. Constitutional protections. The Constitution of India, in its endeavour to reflect and protect the aspirations of the citizens of India, has provided a number of provisions to prevent and tackle child labour in India. Article 24 states that no child below the age of 14 years shall be employed to work in any factory or in any hazardous employment. Article 39F endeavours to ensure that childhood and youth are not exploited and not morally and materially abandoned. Article 45 stipulates free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14 years. Enactments. A specific legal framework for the prevention of child labour is in place. The Child Labour Prohibition and Regulation Act of 1986 is the principal act dealing with the issue. It prohibits the employment of children below the age of 14 years in hazardous occupations identified in a list by the law, which was expanded in 2006 and again in 2008. It is important to note that the Act makes an exception and permits employment of children in activities enlisted in Schedule B as long as these are being carried out from a family workshop. The Right to Free and Compulsory Education Act of 2009 mandates free and compulsory education for children in India. The Act also mandates that 25% of seats in every private school must be allocated for children from disadvantaged groups and physically challenged children. This Act is to be read in consonance with Article 21A and Article 45 of the Constitution. The Factories Act of 1948 prohibits the employment of children below the age of 14 years in any factory and also place rules on who, when and how long can pre-adults aged 15 to 18 years be employed in any factory. The Mines Act of 1952 prohibits the employment of children below 18 years of age in mines. The Juvenile Justice Care and Protection of Children Act of 2000 made it a crime punishable with a prison term for anyone to procure or employ a child in any hazardous employment or in bondage. Initiatives by the Indian government. The National Policy on Child Labour of 1987 looks at a gradual and sequential approach with a focus on rehabilitation of children working in hazardous occupations, stricter enforcement of laws and developmental programs will ensure the tackling of the root causes like poverty. The National Children Labour Project (NCLP) initiative was the outcome of the policy. It undertakes legal and development initiatives with a current central government funding of Rs 6 billion targeted solely to eliminate child labour in India. Subsistence of the issue despite awareness and intent. The ground realities are far from comforting. The actual number of child labourers is not correctly documented. This is largely because they are mostly employed in the unorganized sectors where the arm of law cannot reach to be able to prevent abuse. Here, bonded labour is rampant as children are pledged against unreturned loans and become victims of abuse. Trafficking of children is at an alarming level in society. Bonded labour of children leads to physically and psychologically impaired children. A fledgling economy, armed conflicts, forced displacement due to development projects throws adults out of work, which further puts pressure on the children to go out and earn as society exploits them for cheap labour. Some experts believe that the court's ruling distinguishing them hazardous and non-hazardous sectors is counterproductive in preventing exploitation of labour. All this can be dealt with if the government shows more resolve and tackles the apathy that has seeped into its system. A survey conducted by the 7th All India Education Survey 2002 reveals some alarming facts on child labour. It reflects the dimension and scale of the sad reality. As per the report, 17 million children are engaged in child labour in India. 19% are engaged as domestic help, 90% work in rural areas, 85% work in unorganized sectors, 80% work in agricultural work. 2 million children between the ages of 5 and 15 work in the commercial sex trade, and 3.3 million children between the ages of 15 to 18 years work in the commercial sex trade. 5 lakh children are forced into this trade each year. Why child labour cannot be completely prohibited? Child labour, while being an abhorrent practice, merely can't be wished away because of the socio-economic compulsions. Laying down harsh rules that prevent it can cause serious ramifications. This is evident in the judgment passed in the M.C. Mehta versus State of Tamil Nadu 1997 Supreme Court case. The courts have in this judgment and in others taken a middle path by recognizing the limitations of the socio-economic set-up. In some cases, the families that send the children to work depend on this income, and children have no alternative means of employment. While this is in digression of the directive principles contained in Article 39 and 45 of the Constitution that advocates that all children should go to school, it is a realistic response seeing the ground reality. In the circumstances, the courts have attempted to be reasonable and have tried to demarcate certain sectors that are dangerous to the growth, development and safety of the child, and has been banned them completely. Matchmaking industry, precious stone polishing industry, etc. Further, the courts have made it mandatory for half yearly checks to ensure child welfare. 8. Suggestions for reducing child labour. Child labour is an issue that needs to be addressed on a war footing. The children of today are the future and citizens of tomorrow. By ensuring an emotionally and economically safe and nurturing environment for them, we are ensuring a productive and safe future for ourselves. The answer lies in a multi-pronged and multi-institutional approach. The answer lies in addressing the causes that lead to this predicament and prevalence of this practice of child labour. Media, voluntary organizations and NGOs can play a crucial role by highlighting the causes and issues relating to this problem. Awareness will enlighten citizens and ensure vigilance. Programs and promotions on the burden of overpopulation are the need of the hour. Since poverty is one of the main causes, eradicating poverty and providing stable employment opportunities for adults should be a priority for the government. Ensuring quality education and availability of facilities for schools will give the children the opportunity to study and carve a future for themselves. Police and government institutions can be alert and prevent abuse and ensure proper implementation of government plans. Consequences of child labour. The consequences of child labour can be clearly divided into physical, emotional and development damages. Physical: children working for long hours, especially in hazardous industries, are at risk of damage to their mind and body. They become vulnerable to disease and decay. They do not get time and opportunities to exercise and play, which further hampers their development. Emotional: bonded labour, physical and sexual abuse, and the burden of earning at a young age can lead to untold physical and emotional ramifications in the long term in children. Development: lack of education limits the future of children and society. Without training and education, jobs that will lift them from the shackles of poverty into a better life are difficult to come by. Nationally, the workforce of the country remains impoverished in terms of skills and prowess. This has been a cascading effect on the economy and future of the country. Conclusion. Thus, as can be seen, the conundrum of the child labour problem is both multifaceted and extremely complex. While the government and the legislature have certainly taken steps toward tackling the issue, the harsh reality remains that the issue of child labour in India is far from resolution, and the evils and impacts are felt by children across the country on an everyday basis. While it seems appropriate in a practical sense to have simply allowed for a subsistence of the problem on the ground that the socio-economic realities of the country do not allow for a blanket restriction on the employment of a child labourers, the country needs to take steps towards finding a way to be able to deal with these issues face first and not let these factors play a role in perpetuating the problem of child labour and subjugating the country's children to harsh and dangerous conditions. Thank you.